a new trend in orthopedic treatment. We're joined now live by regenerative orthopedics physician, Dr. Trevor Turner. Doctor, we appreciate your time and your expertise and you sharing it with us. Let's start here. When people think of orthopedics and orthopedic surgery, they think of surgery often front of mind. How have things been changing in recent years?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this. So, many years ago, there was a type of laser that was used in orthopedics, and it was a very overpowered laser. It was very ablative, and what people found was that the outcomes after using it were not very good. Since that time, we've had refinements of technology, and there's a novel type of laser on the market today called Regenelace, which is a fractional laser that allows us to actually, through a needle, so the tip of this laser is actually smaller than an end of a paper clip, basically insert this under local anesthesia so that a patient doesn't need to have any actual surgery, and can be used to treat cartilage disease on the inside of the knee, as well as cartilage disease or problems on the inside of a disc in the lumbar spine, which is very, very exciting, especially after the human clinical trial data that was used to develop this technology showed that even within 6 months, we were having regeneration of hyaline-like cartilage on the surface of a knee, which is really just not something that we otherwise see or find in medicine.
Dr. Turner, a question for you. When people hear your description of the laser and its usage and how it has gotten less invasive, some of that is a little technical. For somebody who is a layman, what is the outcome? What is presumably the benefit of deploying less invasive, less disruptive techniques when undergoing treatment for what are sometimes common ailments with knee and spine issues?
Yeah, I think if we go back to either, the type of recovery that's required after a knee replacement, let's say, or, a spinal fusion, oftentimes that recovery is long and can be hard. It can be 12 weeks or longer. It can require a lot of medication and a lot of physical therapy. And so the use of this novel type of laser, especially when combined with, some FDA compliant regenerative approaches, really enable the patient to have a lot less pain and improve their function, not only more quickly, but also for the long run, often with minimal downtime that would be required after a typical cartilage procedure or joint replacement.
One of the things we talk about a lot, and folks in the medical profession talk about a lot as well, is the importance of being an informed patient and asking good questions. For somebody who might be watching this right now and listening in, maybe they have some hip or some knee or some spine pain they're thinking about getting treatment for. What questions would you suggest they ask their physicians about what kind of treatments would be right for them?
Well, I think anybody now, especially with the advent of a lot of these kind of large language model and artificial intelligence tools, will say, okay, I understand that there may be some research out there, but is that research applicable to me? And so we see a lot of people using tools like that to ask questions. I think, any patient who's considering have a procedure done needs to understand what are the contraindications or what are the reasons that someone would medically not be safe to have a procedure done, number one. Number two, to figure out if their diagnosis is correct. And number three, I think a lot of people will want to know, how much pain is associated with it? What is the cost of a procedure? Is the doctor that I'm going to see to talk about it, going to listen to me and sort of understand what my goals are as an individual and as a person? And so I think those are the questions most people should be asking.
As we mark Black History Month, some new data suggests that Black households may once again be the first to feel trouble if the economy starts to slip up. Joining us now is Binga Ajilaray, Chief Economist at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, to talk more about this. Binga, great to see you this morning. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. You describe in this research that Black households are a canary in a coal mine in the economy. What are some of the warning signs that you're seeing right now?
So the biggest warning sign that I'm seeing is the rise in the unemployment rate. So between 2024 and 2025, the Black unemployment rate almost rose about a 1 percentage point higher than the year before. And for comparison, if you look at the overall unemployment rate, it only went up by 0.3%. And so Black households have been losing their jobs faster than any other group.
And why do you think that is? Why are they feeling a weakening labor market first?
So to look at it historically, the Black unemployment rate has always been about double the white unemployment rate, and for a lot of reasons due to discrimination and problems with the labor market. So whatever happens when the labor market starts to weaken or soften, Black workers are the first ones to lose their jobs. And so that's why it's kind of concerning when we're seeing this over the last year.
Has any progress been made over the years, or has this been building for decades?
So this has been building for decades. Once in a while, so we saw during the aftermath of the pandemic, when we had a very tight labor market, that the gap between Black and white unemployment rate started to close. They were starting to get better jobs. At the same time, when the labor market gets tight, wages start to go up. Now, over the last year, and one of the things I want to focus on is look at what happened with the federal workforce. Because one thing about the federal workforce, it's always been one of the best places to find a job, good wages, great benefits. And we've seen with DOGE last year that has been targeting the federal workforce. So that's played a role in the higher unemployment rate for Black households.
Some other decisions coming out of D.C. that may also be impacting this that I want to ask you about. We got this latest CPI number last week that showed inflation actually cooling a bit compared to what economists were anticipating. But look, it doesn't stop the fact that people are saying things are just so expensive right now. And then you also have tariffs to factor in. So if you're a small business owner and you're a Black small business owner, how are you perhaps impacted more by those rising costs and tariffs than your counterpart?
So with Black small businesses in particular, and small business in general, a lot of times your inputs are sourced overseas. And so one of the things that we saw last year, especially with Liberation Day around April of last year, where there were tariffs put on over 70 countries, it's not like if you put a tariff on China, you can go to Malaysia or Cambodia. Those countries have tariffs too. And you just can't really source locally, and so that makes it more difficult. And so these tariff price rises means your costs are going up, but your revenues are not going up, and so now your profit margins are starting to get squeezed.
What would you like to see from lawmakers?
Well, I'd like to see lawmakers, one, Congress has the power of the purse when it comes to tariffs. Article 1 of the Constitution tells them that they can do that. Congress needs to take control of that. With tariffs having more, there's sometimes a logical reason for having tariffs, but the way that tariffs are being implemented in a chaotic and haphazard way makes it really difficult for small businesses, particularly Black small businesses. And so we'd like Congress to take over tariffs and make it more manageable so that these businesses can work. The other thing is we have to realize the federal government does a lot of good work for all Americans, and we have to support that. So in certain cases, you may want to have smaller government, other cases you want larger government. This is especially true in rural communities. So I'd like to see Congress, lower tariffs, make sure that it's not haphazard, and then also support federal government work because the federal government supports all of the American public.
If we continue to see these trends moving in the direction they are, what do you think that could signal for the broader market?
So with higher unemployment and higher prices, there's going to be a worry about stagflation. And so that's going to mean that the economy is going to constrict, and it's going to be tougher for people to find jobs. It's going to be difficult for people and businesses to be able to make money. And in this, while we're not going to see major recessions like the pandemic or the Great Financial Recession, there may be a slight downturn. And this, recessions have long-term scarring impacts, especially when you think about new entrants, people coming out of college, young workers. And so that's going to make it difficult for the economy to really boost itself.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about losing civil rights leader Jesse Jackson yesterday. And I'm curious to know what you think he'd be saying about this issue today and what he had spent a lifetime doing to address this very issue.
So, yeah, it was a sad day yesterday. He was a giant, especially here in D.C. and Chicago, but throughout the country. And I think what he would say is that, again, we need to support Black households and Black small businesses. But he wouldn't focus on that. We think about the Rainbow Coalition and looking at Latino, white, poor, rich, everybody, and kind of developing the values of community and strengthening community. And he would focus on that to make the economy stronger and the country stronger.
Dr. Rachel Scheinfield, she offers therapy for children, teens, and families. Doctor, we know it's a heavy topic, but we're very grateful that you're making the time to talk to us. If I could ask this question right off the top, what advice do you give to families to have a conversation as maybe their children, their loved ones are watching this trial unfold and hearing that gut-wrenching testimony from some of these young people who were inside of the school?
Hi, thank you for having me. And certainly, this is a very heavy topic indeed. And, I think it isn't unusual for when this testimony is coming about into the surface that people are having reactivated trauma. That level of grief and fear and shock and hopelessness, that they just continue to experience even after a period of time. And it's really important that parents are able to provide the level of support and school systems support their child, that this is a very normal response, ensuring that they're safe, ensuring that it's absolutely normal to experience these types of feelings after witnessing such a traumatic event.
And for somebody who is a parent and maybe wants to broach the subject with their child, who is a student at another school district somewhere in Georgia or even somewhere else in the country, but they've been following along. This has been on social media, it's on the news, it's on the internet. This is, like so many other school shootings, something that kids are keenly aware of. What steps would you advise a parent to take to open that conversation up, to maybe say, hey, I know you're probably hearing about this. Are you okay? What can I do to be there for you? How do you start that conversation as a parent?
Yeah, it is a concern for parents to kind of be delicate and tread this lightly, but also it's important that they are honest and authentic as well. So I think, like I said, normalizing the range of emotions that they may experience, but also offering any questions that they might have, being able to answer those very openly and honestly, but also briefly. We want to make sure that we're not providing too much information, but also being honest at the same time. It's also important to be able to say, what exposure they have to some of this information. What have they seen? What do they know about this? What have their friends been telling them? What have they heard? And make sure that they clarify any misinformation that's going out there. A lot of times things get lost in the shuffle and the information doesn't tend to be accurate. Also, it's really important to, as a parent, to reassure the children that there's stability and there's safety. And no matter what, even after going through such a horrendous experience, it's really important to say that they are safe and we are here for you. And as a community and larger, that we're leaning into compassion here. And what can we do to support one another, including friends and the larger community, can often be a helpful way for children to cope with such a traumatic event.
And we know that the Barrow County community, the Appalachia community, has wrapped its arms around these kids who went through the unspeakable just about a year and a half ago inside of Appalachia High School. But for other students, for other young people out there, we've talked about the parental side of this conversation. But what advice would you have for other students, other young people who are growing up at a time when lockdown drills have become a routine part of being a student in America, and who see this trial unfolding, who maybe feel some anxiety, maybe feel some fear? What advice would you give to them about how to make sense of all this and cope as best they can?
Yeah, well, when a tragedy affects the school community, it certainly has a ripple effect across, many areas, including, it's a national topic, and it's an unfortunate one at this point in time, especially in young children's lives. I really think I always encourage kids to ask questions, to be able to find that designated individual that they feel like they can trust, whether it is a parent, it's an outside provider, a pediatrician, a psychologist, a teacher, somebody in their, a church community, or anyone else that they feel that they can go to. I also feel that if their anxiety about this, or they tend to have a lot of what we call intrusive thoughts, where there's a lot of ruminating, their fixation on some of these topics, there's a lot of fear about the what ifs. And I think that's important for them to be able to talk to somebody about that, because this is real. And unfortunately, this is their reality these days. And I think for them to know, one, where safety exists, and also, what are the things in place within their schools, within their day-to-day lives, that offers that level of stability and security, because that's important for them to know. Because I do see day in and day out, this is bound to happen to me sometime. That's what I hear all the time. And we certainly want to be honest with kids, but we also want them to feel that they have a level of stability and security around them.
Doctor, you just said something there I want to dwell on for a moment. You just said you hear young people coming into your office talking to you and saying they feel like this is something that is going to happen to them. Do you hear that often from young people?
I often hear that children are incredibly fearful of something, in their words, something bad happening in their school. They are very accustomed to lockdown drills at this point in time. It's no longer the standard tornado drills, preparing for weather, fire drills, and so on. They are prepared for lockdown drills and sometimes wondering, is this going to happen? That's no longer a drill and it's going to happen in real time. What does that mean? Who do I call? I have a lot of patients who experience a lot of anxiety about something bad happening to them. And some of it as a result of a lockdown drill. They are notified that it is a drill in their schools. That is something that all schools practice. However, it does ignite a lot of fear in many of these children and is unfortunately reinforced when they hear about an event happening in the larger community or in the national news about a school shooting and wondering, when is it going to be our time? I certainly hope that isn't. And as a psychologist, I absolutely hope that's never the case for any of them. But unfortunately, with the statistics that are shown, their fears make a lot of sense. And we have to do our best from an outside standpoint as an outside professional, but also in communities and school settings to do everything in our power to ensure that we can do whatever we can to pick up on any warning signs or things that are going on that may suggest that there's some level of unsafe. They're not safe there. We hope that's not the case. We hope it doesn't reach that point in time, but hopefully, we're able to continue to build mental health awareness and provide support for those who really need it, especially at a young age.
And Doctor, we really appreciate your perspective on all this. One last question for you, because I would be remiss if we didn't bring up this element of the conversation as well. We've talked about parents, we've talked about the students. Teachers are also a part of this conversation. They are in the schools day in and day out. They're the ones who are training to handle the lockdown drills. They're leading their classrooms through these drills. God forbid, they're leading their classrooms through actual lockdowns when the worst occurs. What would you tell them? What advice would you give them and maybe give school systems as a whole to support the teachers in our school systems as best as possible, as they surely are grappling with a lot of really tough emotions right now too?
Yeah, that's a great question. Teachers are phenomenal in so many areas, and there's such an expectation that they have to be the jack of all trades and handle it all. And as you said, it is unfortunate that this is something that they have to try to be prepared for and be able to handle. And there's the teachers out there, and so many of them that I've worked with over the years are so talented in so many ways. And I truly believe that they have genuine care for their students and show such a wonderful way of being able to provide emotional support. And they need support as well individually. So I think for them to band together with other teachers and make sure that they are able to express openly how they feel, talk about any concerns they have about any safety measures that are taking place in their school. How are they handling any exposure to traumatic events that they may have seen in the past, and just their ongoing worry about safety and what they're doing for that. And also just having open conversations one-on-one with teachers and teacher to teacher, but also class-wide as it presents itself. I think the biggest thing is to really focus on having authenticity and openness in a way that's appropriate for people to be able to talk about it and not it to be living in fear where they don't feel like it's okay to talk about it. It's a scary topic. It triggers a lot of different emotions and it makes sense, but it also is really important that people understand these emotional reactions are normal, and it's okay to experience it as hard as they are. And we need to continue the conversation about these very difficult things and continue to move forward and how we can help each other and stand together and offering that support, and especially offering mental health support and advocacy for those who truly need it, picking up on those warning signs, not waiting until it's hopefully not too late.
Late night television is colliding with federal election law. Stephen Colbert says CBS pulled his interview with Texas Democratic Senate candidate James Tallarico, citing concerns it could trigger the FCC's equal time rule as early voting begins. Colbert blasted the decision on his late show telecast, calling it corporate overreach, then posted the full interview online where FCC rules don't apply. Here to break down what the FCC's equal time rule is and isn't is John Acevedo, visiting associate professor of practice at Emory University School of Law. A lot of journalists understand this, but I think it's important for the public to know what's going on here. In simple terms, what exactly does the equal time rule require?
So the equal time rule dates back to kind of pre-cable television days and pre-internet, where there were just a handful of major networks. And the idea was that the networks or radio would have to give equal time to a candidate on their programming or sell them ad space at an equal rate. Starting from the 1950s, there's been an exception for news shows, and that's been interpreted until really this last couple of months to include talk shows, daytime and nighttime.
So does it automatically apply when a candidate appears on a talk show?
It hasn't for the last 40 to 50 years. This is a new interpretation by the FCC that they're trying to put forward in the last year or less.
So let's dig into how much risk would CBS realistically face if it aired the interview?
Probably very little. I think this was corporate overreach and trying not to irritate the FCC more than it was actual, fear of a complaint. Even if there was a complaint, the penalty is usually just a fine. In theory, the station could lose its license, but revocation of a license is supposed to be reserved for only kind of systemic or serious violations, not a one-off interview breach.
So who rings the alarm here? Who would even say, like, hey, this was a problem? Would another candidate actually have to request the equal time to trigger the problem?
Another candidate would. The FCC here triggered it itself, which was a little interesting also, but usually it's the opposing candidate.
Yeah, so that's what I thought here. So no one even spoke up and said, this will be a problem for me. Let's see here. Do you think that this highlights outdated broadcast regulations? I mean, so many things are changing.
Definitely. I mean, I think everyone forgets that there are still two tiers of regulation. There's the cable television regulation, so channels like HBO, Showtime, even Nickelodeon, Disney are under much looser rules versus the kind of traditional networks that still air, but now air almost exclusively on cable. I mean, there is ABC, CBS. In theory, you could still buy an antenna and capture those for free as they're broadcasts, as they've been for 70 years already through the airwaves. So, but then everything really is being done either streaming or through cable service. It's probably time to update the rules and create a level playing field between cable and network TV.
What do you say would have been the right way to handle this situation?
I think they should have just allowed the interview to go forward. We've seen candidates appear on talk shows. Famously in the 90s, Bill Clinton appeared on the Arsenio Hall show. President Obama appeared as an early candidate on, I think it was The Tonight Show with David Letterman, where famously his shoes were worn out. So everyone saw that he had stuffed newspaper, very traditional Chicago fix, or worn out shoes. There's a long history of this. There's always been an exception for these late night appearances. Those late shows are really kind of considered news-like in that they cover topics of the day.
20 years of Construction Ready's Career Expo. It's a big hands-on event at the Georgia World Congress Center where thousands of Georgia students are getting a real look at careers in the skilled trades and also meeting people who are hiring. Joining us now is Scott Shelar, President and CEO of Construction Ready, to talk about how this event has evolved and why it matters now. Scott, good morning to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you for having me.
So you've been doing this 2 decades now. I'm curious to know how Career Expo has grown over that time and what makes this year different.
Well, so we started in the parking lot of a Home Depot with a few hundred, people 20 years ago, and it's just steadily grown over the years. I mean, we moved from the parking lot at Home Depot to a fairgrounds and then to the GICC, and now we're at the Georgia World Congress Center, which of course is the largest venue in Georgia and the third largest venue in the United States. And we're expecting close to 12,000 people over today and tomorrow. So it's really grown steadily over the last 20 years, and just super excited to be here and just love the energy at this event every year.
Well, congrats on the growth. It seems like it comes at an important time in the construction industry where we're hearing about labor shortages. Can you just put that in perspective for us? Tell us what that gap means in reality and perhaps what's driving it.
Yeah, so the gap is about 500,000 across the United States right now is what the experts say we need. And here in Georgia, it's around 10,000 new construction workers that we need every year. And so the focus of this event is just to make people aware of those opportunities. And specifically, when I say construction, I mean carpenters, electricians, plumbers, heating and air technicians, heavy equipment operators. And so this event is all about promoting those opportunities, making students especially aware of those opportunities so that when they get out of high school, they consider this as an option for them once they're ready to go to work.
I mean, what is the reason or some of the big reasons behind that 500,000 gap?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. We have an aging workforce, right? A lot of baby boomers are retiring from the industry, so that's part of it. And there's still great demand for construction services, even with the economy maybe cooling off a little bit. There's still tremendous demand. I was driving, into downtown Atlanta this morning, and I was just blown away by the number of tower cranes, on our skyline and just all of the construction activity. And then you have things like data centers, coming into Georgia on a regular basis. You have a ton of, highway infrastructure type work happening. And so there's just still a lot of demand for construction services. And so it's the combination of a lot of people are aging out and retiring from our industry, but then also there's still tremendous demand for construction.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that demand. I was talking to a friend of mine in the industry, and he said, watch out for the data center boom that you just alluded to as well. He said it's going to create a huge need for electricians, for example. Do you think the supply of workers can realistically keep up with the demand?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the good thing is I think people's eyes are open to the opportunities. I've been doing this personally for 28 years, and I can say now more than ever, young people are really considering these options. I think for a long time in our country, we told young people they had to go get a 4-year degree to be successful in life. And I think a lot of people's eyes have opened up and realized that that's not necessarily the case.
When we were talking about the
Yes.
data centers just a moment ago, you mentioned how some young people are now weighing, the benefits of a 4-year degree and what that means in terms of taking on debt versus a trade job. I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about, is AI going to be coming for my job, and what does that mean for me? When we talk about the jobs that are going to be at that expo and shown there today, are they AI proof, or I mean, how is technology going to change some of the construction jobs? It
is a great point, and that is something. Yes, no, you're exactly right, and that's. Yeah, it is definitely AI proof, as we like to say. It's obviously AI is coming in and replacing a lot of the white collar jobs, but we're not seeing that happen. It's going to be a while. We tell people before AI can come in and repair, your plumbing problem in your house, for example. So it definitely is a selling point in terms of these being stable opportunities, and with the demand that we talked about earlier. They're going to be opportunities, and they're most likely not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon.
What about some of the earnings and career growth potential in some of these skilled jobs?
Yeah, so what's amazing is, we have training programs in our high schools, right? And so these students, a lot of the students who are here competing are learning these trades in their schools, right? In their career and tech ed programs. And so we have stories of young men and women graduating, coming out, earning, 6 figures straight out of high school, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. Now, I want to be clear, that doesn't happen with every job, but if you have the training and you have the experience, a lot of our students are working during the summer, or they're in a work-based learning program where they're gaining experience. It is realistic that you can come out of high school making, $40-50 an hour, which translates to, $80,000-$100,000 a year. We are seeing that. And of course, that's without the burden of any sort of student loan debt as well. So it really is a great way to start a career at a really young age. And so it's exciting. And that's why we're so eager to share these opportunities with young people, especially.
All right, so for the young people out there watching, is it too late for them to register if they want to attend the Career Expo? What should they know?
Constructionready.org is our website, and they can go there. They can come down, and it is not too late. They can still come down. It's going on today, the rest of today, and all day tomorrow, Friday, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we would certainly welcome people to come down and meet our employers.
Very good, Scott. Anything I'm missing that you want to pass along to folks today on this topic?
No, just know that there are opportunities, and I mentioned Atlanta, but really all across the state of Georgia, we're still growing as a state, and so it's not just our city, but Savannah, Augusta, Macon, Columbus are all booming in some way. As you pointed out, there are data centers going in everywhere, and so just lift up that there are opportunities all over the state, and this is a great event to come learn about those opportunities.
Probably know Georgia has that hands-free law when it comes to using the cell phone in your car, but some new data is raising a question over whether smartphone distraction is still driving crashes, especially among youth. Joining us now for an important conversation this morning is Maurice Rains, Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, to talk about what the numbers show and what needs to change. Mr. Rains, good morning, sir. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on today.
Well, you're welcome. We know this law, this hands-free law, went into effect in Georgia about 8 years ago, 2018. From your perspective, is it making a difference when it comes to reducing crashes and fatalities?
It is making a difference, but we do have an issue in our state. Not only our state, we're grateful to have a hands-free law from House Bill 673 that was enacted July 1 of 2018. However, once the law was in effect, we did see a 5% decrease right out the chute. Here lately, though, the numbers are not going in the direction we want them to go in. We have a group of young drivers. That's where the highest is per 100,000 licensed drivers, that it is an issue, but all of us have to admit at some point while driving, we are distracted.
How do you get through to those young drivers? Sadly, Mr. Rains, I don't think they're watching 11 Alive Plus at 10:15 on this Thursday morning. How do you find them, and what's your message to them?
We have to go where they are with the message. We have to go to events that they attend and have messaging out there with information of how serious this situation is across our state, not only across the state, our nation, and educate them. And unfortunately, if education does not work, the only other component we have is enforcement. And we're doing our best to do that. We do have a new strategy in the Governor's Office of Highway Safety coming out on April 1. Won't talk about what that is, but I think it's going to be great to work in that capacity to help us with these distracted drivers.
How do you enforce this? Is it one of the things where a trooper's driving down the road and they look over and see somebody on their phone, or is it more methodical than that?
It is. It's one of those moments. It's unfortunate. Even though an officer makes a traffic stop for being distracted, somebody else drive by distracted. So we definitely have to get the educational piece in place, and we're doing that. And we're gonna see that intensify come April 1. Getting the message out, and we do know, and I will say this: we can't do this alone. The motoring public has to help us with this issue. And once we do the educational piece, we'll have to do less enforcement. But if the educational piece doesn't work, then we have no choice but to go to enforcement.
You know, when we talk about education, this number really stood out to me. Only about 5% of young drivers in fatal Georgia crashes had been drinking. And yet we know if you want to get a driver's license here in Georgia, you got to go through this alcohol education class or at least learn about it. Do you think it's time to mandate distracted driving education as well before you get a license?
Well, anytime you can mandate something before you get started, and I will say this, and I want to defend young people right out the chute. Young people have watched their parents speed. They've watched their parents talk on the cell phone. They watched their parents not be vocal. And I pray to God none, there's been a few that have seen their parents impaired while driving. So the issue that we have is changing the behavior that they learn before they even begin to drive. And we're working in that capacity. And to be honest with you, we're actually getting ready to educate at the 4th and 5th grade. Because the middle school kids are already kind of developed habits based on what they've seen their parents do. But I want you to think about this component for just a moment. As soon as a 15-year-old gets a learner's permit and they get behind the wheel with their parent, the first thing the parent says to them, don't you speed, put on your seatbelt, and don't you dare pick up that phone. And they watch their parents do it for years. So the culture is in place. So what I'm getting at, the most important thing we can do now is try to drive home the educational piece by going where these kids are. We've got to go to the schools. We've got to go to these sporting events. We've got to have events that they'll be, whether even if it's an expo or a fair or whatever, we're going to all of those components to try to educate, because education is key. If we can educate, then we don't have to enforce.
Speaking of getting through to the youth and culture perhaps being a problem, I want to ask you about some breaking news we got about an hour ago. 2 UGA football players were arrested overnight for reckless driving. We have talked about this before in the program. I'm not asking you to speak about this case specifically, but just broadly speaking, how do you buck that trend? Because we have seen this happen time and time again when it comes to young athletes inside that one program.
It's immaturity for one. It's an immaturity piece, whether it be I'm just going to see what I can do, I'm going to see what I can get away with. So it's immaturity is part of the equation. But a lot of people young feel that there's no consequences for their action until they're caught. And most of the time they get caught. And so I think, again, it goes back to, I'm certain that, when we single out sporting events, because they are high profile and they're seen all the time. The question is, we do know that these coaches and these athletes are given guidance as to what to do and not to do. It's just about taking a chance. It's just like beginning to speed. When you look at the speedometer, it says 55 and you see it go to 60, you're speeding. So the component at that point is just getting caught. So I think what has to happen in that capacity is we've got to drive home education. That's the only way we're going to change the trend. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. We cannot do this alone. We have to have the public's help.
If Coach Kirby Smart asked you to come speak to his program, what would your message be to college-age students? You talked about trying to find 4th graders and 5th graders at a young age and get to them early. But what about when you're 20 years old and you've already started to develop these habits? What do you preach to a college student?
First of all, the consequences for bad behavior. Everyone has to understand that there is consequences when you do conduct bad behavior. And in conducting bad behavior, when you conducting bad behavior, you're going to have to deal with it. And so when you don't have that mindset that you could get caught or there are consequences on the end, you take chances.
We're going to turn now to Georgia State University College of Law's Eric Siegel, a professor there. Professor, we appreciate you joining us right now. Let's start with this. I know you've been following along with this trial's developments as well. What has stood out to you so far?
Well, first of all, anytime we talk about this, we must remember how tragic this entire situation has been for the people who died, the families, the community. It's just one more in a series of school shootings in our country that we should all be very sad about. This is the first time in Georgia ever that a parent has been tried to be held liable for the acts of a child in this kind of context. In the United States in general, only Michigan. There's one Michigan case. Other than that, no one has really ever been convicted before of this kind of crime. Let me say at the outset that the Second Amendment, whatever one thinks about that, however you view that, whatever lens you view that through, has absolutely nothing to do with this case, because there is no reasonable argument that a 14-year-old has a Second Amendment right to this kind of gun, or a parent has a Second Amendment right to give their child this kind of gun. Now, it is legal in Georgia. In fact, it is legal in most places for teenagers to possess these kinds of guns. In Georgia, teenagers can't really possess handguns except under some very limited circumstances. But it was legal for the son to have the gun in the room. But that doesn't mean he has a right to the gun in the room. So the Second Amendment really doesn't apply here at all.
Professor, help us tease that out. You say it was legal, but he didn't have a right to do that. Parse that out for somebody who maybe isn't a legal scholar like yourself.
Sure. Sorry. What I'm saying is, it turns out that in Georgia, there is no age requirement for people to possess, assault weapons and those kinds of long guns. Handguns are a different story, but this was, of course, involved, an assault weapon. So he was allowed to have it, but that doesn't mean that the parents didn't commit negligence the father didn't commit criminal negligence. I'm not saying he did or didn't, but by allowing the child to have it. I just want to be clear what the Second Amendment protects is the right of people to own guns. Teenagers don't have a Second Amendment right to own assault rifles. The fact that it's legal is different than you have a right to do it. There are a lot of things that are legal today that the state could make illegal tomorrow. For example, Georgia could decide tomorrow, consistent with the Second Amendment, no one under the age of 18 can possess this kind of gun. That could be a law. It just isn't.
Professor, let's talk a little bit about the legal theory behind the prosecution's decision to charge Colin Gray in this case. As you pointed out, it's never before been done in Georgia. It's only likely been done once elsewhere in the nation. Why is it that it is so rare to see a prosecutor press charges against a parent of an accused school shooter?
Because these cases are very hard to prove. And you have to have, I think, none of us want to hold parents responsible for the acts of a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, absent compelling evidence that they should have done something different. But I think there is, in this case, reasonable arguments that there is compelling evidence that this father should have done something different. Let me give you an analogy. I'm not playing law professor here, but I think this makes it easier to understand. If a parent gave an 11 or 12 or even a 14-year-old probably the keys to the car, and the kid had never driven in his life, and said, hey, go take a spin on 285, and then the kid injures somebody, negligently while driving, wouldn't we all have a very serious problem with the parent handing the child the keys? Well, in this case, I think we would. Now, whether that's criminally liable or not, we can debate. If it was an 8-year-old, we would all say the parent should be criminally liable. And frankly, if the son here was 8 years old, I think we would all agree also that the parent should be held criminally liable. 14 is a much different situation. But there is, as your reporter recognized a few minutes ago, so much evidence, Zach, that a reasonable person, or I should say a reasonable jury, I think, could probably find that the father could have reasonably foreseen something terrible happening if his, very dysfunctional and obviously somewhat mentally ill son was in possession of this kind of weapon. I believe there was a text message a few weeks before this from the son to the father saying, if something bad happens, blood is on your hands. Well, if I'm a parent and I get that text message, I would like to think the first thing I would do is take guns out of my 14-year-old's room.
And Professor, as you well know, the state always goes first in a case like this. We have been listening to the prosecution present its arguments before the jury. You have laid out your views of what's been presented before the jury so far. But like any good law professor used to ask me, I will now ask you the same question. If you were on the other side of the table and you were a defense attorney in this case, what arguments would you be bringing up to defend your client? And what arguments do you expect the defense in this specific case to raise in defense of Colin Gray?
You'd be a good lawyer. I think the overwhelming idea of the defense is going to have to be kind of a slippery slope argument, which we usually see in First Amendment cases. What I mean by that is, if we hold this parent liable for this, then what's the next parent going to be held liable for? Where the evidence and facts might not be quite as compelling as this case. And then the lawyer trick, or the law professor trick, is, how much is too much? How much liability is too much? And is this slippery slope more dangerous than the benefits that society would get, and that would be just to the victims and the families of holding this father liable? You're right that we've only so far heard the prosecution's case, but there is a lot of there are facts in this case we already know that the defense is not going to deny. The defense is not going to deny that there was a shrine in this person's room, to another mass shooter. So the argument I'd be making is this is a terrible, terrible tragedy, and none of us, want to be here today. And we should all feel sorry for the victims, their families, and the community, frankly, our country. But to hold this person liable under these facts is not fair to him, and will set in motion machinery that all parents now will have to take, measures that are not necessarily so obvious and so reasonable, or they'll be held guilty of second-degree murder or manslaughter. Now, that's the argument I would make. Whether the facts in this case support that, we have to wait and see. Whatever one's views on guns, and Georgia, of course, is a proud defender and supporter of the Second Amendment and all of that. Whatever your views on guns are, there were a lot of warning signs in this case. And I think this case is exactly where it belongs, in a jury of this person's peers. Let me make one more point about that. Whatever happens at the trial, this case is going to be far from over, because there are complicated legal issues involving how the jury is charged, involving how Georgia statutes work, involving how you prove crimes of second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter, that the appellate courts are definitely going to wrestle with if the father is found guilty. Of course, if the father is found innocent, then none of those issues will come up.